So as we start off, while people are thinking what they might want to ask, Dr. Perkins, let me ask you a question. In CCDA, when CCDA first started, there were 3 foundational principles. We call them the 3 R's. You can tell us what they are, but one of them was relocation. And this is a question that comes up a lot with people who are really interested in doing transformational work in communities. Is it necessary for a person to relocate to a community in order to effectively serve that community, or can they, say, volunteer and come from the outside and be as effective?
It depends on what you want to do. Again, we're back to this big deal. Do you want to do Christian community development, or do you want to do some good social services? And if you want to tutor and do some good social services and provide some food and do things like that, oh yeah, you can do that, but you're not doing community development. Community development, and because one of the great problems of our society is our racial situation. That's using up all of our resources, not only of ours, but tribalism and racism and imperialism is expanding the resources of the world with war and bombs and guns in our society. So you have to make a decision, and what do you want to do? Do you want to do good, or do you want to develop the people? Leadership development then assume that we're going to develop the people. I mean, community development means that we're going to develop the people. And we're going to help the people, the indigenous people, to have some control over their lives. They're going to stamp out imperialism and exploitation. And they're going to live a life of liberation and joy. Do you want to do that? Or do you want to affirm yourselves and feel gooder than the other people? But if you relocate and become one with the people, that's the way Jesus did it. And if we're going to be Christian, there's an assumption that we want to be like him. We want to be like Jesus. As he was, John says, so are we. So are we ought to be. In a Christian, or do you want to maintain your superior position? Jesus humbled himself and became obedient unto death. Let this mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. Although he was God, he humbled himself and came down and was put to death by the sinful people of this world. But his death was the redemption of the world. Do you want to be Christian? Or do you want to be a do-gooder? Be a do-gooder. I wish all you do-gooders would come to Jackson and help me. Help me. But you would help me do more effective, probably, my work that I'm doing. You know, I would come up with some kind of way where I charge y'all $25 a day while you're doing that, and we could take that resources and help the indigenous people get some scholarship to go to college. You know what I mean? So come on down. And that's what leadership needs. Leadership should be the people who can initiate creative development that's going to empower the people in the community. You know, so the question is what you want to do. You can do good. You can do good, but you can't do community development effective that way, because you're going to still maintain your superior attitude, and you're going to be still trying to preserve your advantage. But when you come down and suffer with the people, you will find that will end up being the greatest advantage, because you will feel and sense their cry and their pain, and your pain will be mixed with their pain, and then you do something about the problem in the community.
Dr. Perkins, before we lose what fueled your passion, as that theologian built into you, what was the third?
Let me hear.
Yeah, before we lose what fueled your passion, what was the third passage of Scripture that was built into you by that theologian?
Oh, I think it was yeah. You got me, didn't you? You got me. You got me. I think the third one, as I think of it, I don't know how I missed it there. The third one was Galatians 2:20. Galatians 2:20 is that most powerful capsule element of the fullness of the gospel. You know, Christianity is the outliving of the in-living Christ. and the Holy Spirit is all involved in that. And so the Christ is living his life out through us here on earth. And it's not really, if we can yield sufficiently, it's not really us doing the work. And I think it comes out of the fact of our certain gratitude. I think, you've heard of soldiers. I was in the military, only 2 years, but you get the training in about 3 months. So you get the basic training of what it means to be a soldier in about 3 months. And that almost any committed, disciplined soldier would stand in front of if this person is a commander and they see a sniper coming, anybody would put their body on there. Any other disciplined soldier will go on a grenade to save the whole platoon. That just has to do with discipline in life. Discipline and understanding purpose and understanding leadership. Understanding leadership. If we don't have our commander, and you hear that all the time, people falling on grenades and putting their body in front of it. People did that with Ronald Reagan when he was shot. The Secret Service just surrounded him, and they was willing to give their bodies if there was more shot. But that was discipline, and that was purpose.
Right, thank you.
Yeah. So I think that passage gives us a sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Other question? Yeah.
Mr. Perkins, you've been through so many things that I can't even imagine. You have had some amazing experiences. I think there's a little children's book I have at home. It's like this big, and even in that little book, it tells so many great stories that you've had in your life. But my question for you is, with so many different churches that worship 2 blocks from each other, different congregations that wouldn't associate with each other, how do we unite those congregations to do this work that is so necessary in today's world of helping the poor, living incarnationally? How do we light that fire in these churches and get them to unite for the things that Christ has truly called us to do?
Yeah, I hear you. Absolutely wonderful question. The question you're asking is telling us to both the ignorant of the scripture we have and the depths of racism and imperialism and the damage it have done to both of us. It's a deep problem. It only takes a different situation to bring up the superiority and inferiority and the violence within us, because we are so polarized. So polarized. And that polarization have affected black and white and all other ethnic groups. It's tribalism. But it's a great misunderstanding of the intention of the gospel. That was the very intention of the gospel. God was in Christ, reconciling the world unto himself, and has given us the mission of reconciliation, and he believed that this gospel was stronger than race or barriers. Paul said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God to salvation. So our damage have caused us to dilute the very message that God gave us that could transform the world. That's what you're talking about the depths of the sickness, and the depths of the sickness to go out and develop a church based on my race is a heresy that is overbearing. The whole idea of the gospel was to burn through those racial barriers and to make people that the world would know we was Christian because of the love we have one for another. You've asked the most important question here tonight. And if I could pull some kind of miracle to pull that off, but I think the miracle lies within, did Jesus mean that? Do the forgiveness of sin cleanse me from that? if I confess my sins, he's faithful and he's just to forgive us of our sins. And there is no redemption without forgiveness. That was the very essence of the gospel, that we could have the forgiveness of sin. And so what we are preaching today is a sort of a homemade, patched up gospel in our world. And I don't know if just workshops are adequate. I don't know if little old gathering together is adequate. I think we need a more holistic presentation of the gospel almost every time we get up. We need to give at least a minute or so to pull together, regardless of what series we are preaching. We ought to find time to pull that together and pray that the Holy Spirit would take that gospel and penetrate people's heart and break their heart. I think that's the solution, is how do we implement it? I think that's the nature of your question. I couldn't tell you all of that tonight, how to implement it. But we need to know some tools because we're so off theologically. We're so off theologically in the sense that we don't know the application that we're supposed to make to the gospel.
Dr. Perkins, just to follow up on that, you've experienced a lot of racism, violence, murder in your family, all of that, grew up in the segregated South. What made the difference for you, because you're so committed to racial reconciliation? How did you get past the pain and the bitterness and get to the point where you were able to really forgive?
Well, when I was first converted, I thought that, and I was discipled in the fact that the gospel could do that. Then I had to go to experience that it wasn't happening. And it wasn't until I was tortured in the Brandon jail, I think, that the breakthrough came. I saw the sinfulness of sin. Y'all, most of the people don't know what torture is and the effect that torture has upon you. That waterboarding and all of that, it is bringing people to almost to the reality of death. They bring you as close to death as you can come. And now you got to think in the present of that. And in the present of that, you will tell the truth. In the present of that, you will pretty much tell the truth. They said, we got out of these people the information we had when we brought them near death. And that's what torture is designed to do. And so in that torture, I saw the depths of racism. I saw those white people looking like little green animals. But I also saw my own sinfulness. Because in my sinfulness, I really wanted to hate them. But in that moment of sinfulness, I saw it and I cried to God. I know I was bargaining with God. God likes that. I know I was bargaining with God. I said, God, if you'll let me out of this thing tonight, I want to preach a gospel that is stronger than my race. I want to preach a gospel that is stronger than my economic interests. I want to preach a gospel that can burn through this racial barriers and reconcile people to God. As soon as I got out of that jail, I did not want to do that. It had worked for me, the bargain. But I didn't want to do that. And when I had to stop reading my Bible. Every time I'd open my Bible, it would come to that place in Matthew where it says, unless you can forgive people of their trespassing, how do you expect your heavenly Father to forgive you? And it was that word of God that I had made that commitment when I was first committed. If you will teach it to me, Lord, I will preach it. And so God was bringing me back to that torture helped me to come back to the truth. But it also helped me to see the depths of racism. And I think that's what allows me to speak it. I want to speak it not with bitterness. I don't want to speak with bitterness because he's forgiven me for wanting to be bitter about being bitter. You know, and now you got to speak the truth in love. You got to speak it in the light of the fact that you have been forgiven. There is a feeling of power in that. I want to say that. There is a feeling of power in a little bit of trying to be humble. There is a little advantage in that. And so I think that's, I feel good to try to, you young folks haven't experienced racism and been damaged by it like us older folks have. I'm so glad you haven't. I'm so glad you haven't. You don't have to be saved from that foolishness. You can go on and utilize what you got. That's what makes it so important now for this new generation. I can speak to these young folks who have not been so damaged. They will believe the truth. These other folks are so stuck in their historical theology that didn't work. And they don't want to believe that they was wrong and confess it. And so they go on with it. You know, that's what makes this day so powerful for me. Yes.
Dr. Perkins, my name is Rick Boyd, and I teach urban studies, and one of the courses I teach is race and ethnic relations, so this is very relevant to what we're talking about. And I think one of the challenges that a lot of young adults today have is that whereas when we look back to the civil rights movement, it appears that the lines were very clear. I mean, Jim Crow, segregation, it was legal, it was enforced, and you had experiences such as you had in the Jackson City Jail.
Brandon City Jail.
Okay.
A little different. Okay.
But in any case, the kind of racism that exists today is very subtle. Even those who may think and act in racist ways know what to say and what not to say. And yet when we look at where people live economically and racially, we're as segregated today in some ways as we were in the 50s and 60s. And when I talk with white students, they're very sensitive to that, but are often feel a great deal of fear and guilt around that. When I talk with students of color, there's often a lot of sort of residual anger. And so I'm wondering, as you look at where we are today, because you referred to this as a post-racial generation, I think that was your term, how do we address the racism that we experience today, which is, I think, in many ways as real as it was, but expresses itself in very different ways today?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. And of course, if I had the total answer to all of that, I would be too expensive of a consultant. And you wouldn't get a chance to see me. I think it's a lack of commitment. Let me tell you then about what the commitment ought to be. You know, making that kind of commitment could be either way out. Usually, when people are committed to something, they're willing to enter into the pain that it takes to eliminate that. And in order to do that, it's going to take a lot of discipline. And so I think it's our theological mindset at the very end. Jesus, if you would have heard Jesus when he was walking by the beach and calling those fishermen, you would have heard him say, "Follow me." And it would have been, "Come and die with me." That's what he would hear. Today, you would hear, "Come and get blessed." So what we have today is sort of a lukewarm seeking comfort and pleasure. Now, you are saying, and when I preach in the church today, and when Jesus makes a call to us, and when I make that call, like Jesus said, if anyone come after me, let him deny him, people draw up. But when Jesus calls us to him, he calls us to him to be with him, and he puts all of his promise and all of his kindness in this, and that you're going to get the best of Jesus. Come unto me, all of you that are burdened and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn of me. I'm meek. I'm lonely. I need you. And you need me. You see, so the lack today is why we coming to Jesus. Did we come to become a worker together with Jesus? That's what it seemed that redemption is about. It's about, for by grace are you saved through faith, and that faith is not of yourself. It is a gift of God, not of our own effort and works, lest anyone should boast. But we are his workmanship. I would like to do something for Jesus. I wish I could do something for Jesus. I wish I could do something for Jesus, who came into my life in 1957, a third grade dropout. 3 years later, I go into full-time ministry and haven't had a job since in 50 years. I've lived those years, 54 years, at the absolute grace and the blessing of my friends, and I'm not mad with them. They have provided for me to educate and send to school and take care of 8 children, now 13 grandchildren, and now 4 great-grandchildren, and a house to live in, and a car to drive, and clothes to wear. Man, he kept this part of the deal. He's kept his part of the deal. And I get the privilege to be here tonight with you young people. You know, Christianity should be gratitude. He has provided, Peter says, everything that pertains to life and godliness through him who have called us to come be with him. Lo, I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. It's a lack of, it's too cheap. It's too cheap. Can I feel good doing this? You can find joy. And joy is the anticipation of anticipation. Joy is a little bit of the fulfillment of what you hope for. You've seen it almost, not quite. It's coming. That's joy. That's joy. That's deeper than happiness. Happiness sort of floats. But joy is sort of the fulfillment of longing. Yes. Did I answer the question? What was the question at?
Right here, Dr. Johnson.
Yeah.
Boyd, are you satisfied?
Yeah. You got, who you got?
We'll take your question.
He referring to her.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, go right ahead.
Okay, my question goes back to your first statement.
You got to talk a little louder.
My question goes back to your first statement regarding moving to communities to bring up, you say that if people move to grassroots communities, then they're able to encourage creativity, critical thinking, and praxis, as Ledwith talks about it in his book. So, and you also said that when people move to the grassroots communities, they build relationships to bring about change. And my concern with that is that it takes time. It takes a long time. Coming from Africa, I've experienced it. And in Uganda, people really take so long to come up with something. And so my question for you would be that as a community developer who is greatly engaged in that. What are some of the challenges you've come about as you're bringing about sustainable development and holistic development? And also, what would be your advice for those interested in moving into grassroots communities? And
Yeah, that's a long workshop, and it's a reading of Let Justice Roll Down and Beyond Charity and all of that. But your proposition is very accurate. The long term in Africa, how do you get the bigger church, the brotherhood of the church, to know that you are there, you know? And what do you do so the sound can go out? There is a sort of this has not been tested. I don't know if Bonner or Gallup have ever studied this, you know, for a scientific fact. But it seems like when people go anywhere in the world and have a deep enough commitment to change, the voice will go out. The people will find it. I was in Mississippi for 8 or 9 years before people knew I was there. And then, one by one, people began to hear about it. People began to come down and hear about it. And by now, those principles, what she is referring to, those 3 R's are relocation, reconciliation, and redistribution. But when they began to hear about it, they began to come, and they wanted to have a part in it. And that brought the resources. And when the people began to come and live, they challenged the community they came from, because they felt the pain and the poverty of the people. And they went back and talked about that. And we are highly motivated people are easily challenged to do something significant with their life. Wealthy people have found money, but many times they haven't found significant. And they're looking for significant. And so if we can raise something up, take about 5 or 6 or 7 years to sow a seed for it to come to fruition back there. But if we hold it up, I believe people will find it, and then people will want to join together with people. I mean, look how much these rich people paid for these baseball teams, these basketball teams, these racehorses, to have something that be significant, and they can rub that significance off on them because they own those people. And now the basketball players and things are getting too much of the money. That's why they were locked out. You know, but they still come to give them. People want to be in something that's significant. And Christianity done reduced itself down to self elevation. And so you're not getting, I mean, how do you think Bill Bright got the biggest organization that ever been conceived in the history of a missionary organization, and was all volunteer? It was all volunteer. Campus Crusade was the biggest organization that ever been imagined in America. World Vision is almost the biggest. What made that? A few guys like Bob Pierce and others did something different. Why did people follow Martin Luther King? Why did he get Andrew Young and all those guys to come down there to suffer with him, to go to jail with him? Because they saw he was doing something significant. Christianity is not doing that. It's a prosperity, self-elevation organization. You come to be healed. You ought to come to be redeemed. You ought to come to be redeemed. He's the great Redeemer. He's the great. You say, anything wrong being here? Nothing wrong with that. We don't come to God for what he can give us. We come to God to be redeemed. because he's the only one that can forgive sin. And he's the only one who can deal with this racial thing, because the racial thing is the forgiveness of sin. You can't get over that without forgiving. You can't get past that without forgiving it. Workshops won't get you past that. What gets you past that is that you ask the person to forgive you. And if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. But he says, oh, I love you. If you confess your sin, I'm faithful, and he's just to forgive us of our sin and to cleanse us. That's from all unrighteousness. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. What Jesus can do is take away our sin. He can take away that animosity. He can take away that hatred in our lives. You know? Yeah, that's enough for that. Great question. You guys, that's why I like to come to these places. You young folks think.
Hi, Dr. Perkins. It's great to be here with you tonight. I know you've served in both rural Mississippi and urban California. And so I grew up in rural West Alabama, about an hour and a half from Jackson. And I wondered if what you see as the big differences between community development in a rural context and an urban context. What in your experience, what were the big differences?
I think that I was using the African experience, and it's the same experience. It takes longer because the tradition is so set. People change. The best time to reach people with a new idea is when they just move from one place to another. And if people have been in that community all the time, they're set into that tradition. That makes it much harder in that community. And that's so change is easy. We ought to be experiencing renewal and revival in the urban community today, because there's a move. People are changing. So we had some good ideas about multiracialism. If we could show the enrichment, because people think they're coming there to be misery. They're going to be robbed, they're going to be killed, they're going to be dead. So we who are there are there sad sacks. We are caged in. You understand? And we don't reflect no joy out to anybody else. Because yeah. So it's harder. The quickest way without writing a book. It is harder. It takes, the deeper the darkness, the brighter the light. And so we got to get some kind of light to shine. We don't try to change everybody. We try to change a few and then get the committed few. And I think that's, I'm still for the mega church. But what I'm really trying to do is to get the mega church to start little churches in neighborhoods where people are suffering and in pain. So I'm not trying to wipe them out, because they're going to be out there anyway, and they're so prosperous they ain't going to listen to me. you know. So what I need to do is make friends with them and say, why don't we go out there and try to find those people out there that is doing something in the community, and let's join with them. And I think that's sort of like some of the solution, is to bring God's people along beside of those rural people, you know, and then humble yourself. Because rural people in Mississippi in particular feel inferior to almost everybody. They feel inferior. They still fighting an old war down there, you know what I mean? And so when people feel inferior, it's easy to make them angry. When they've already made judgment on you, you say something that's a little bit, it sounds like you're putting them down. And so that's and they feel that way with Yankees coming down there from anywhere else. You know, that makes it harder. So you do have a harder problem. But you got to start a little light. In a dark place.
We're going to go here to my left.
Dr. Perkins, thank you for coming. I must admit that I had not heard of your work or your foundation up until this point, so I'm very appreciative of this opportunity. And ironically enough, I teach in the School of Education and had asked my students to come tonight because one of the things that we're doing right now this week is talking about adolescent development and how communities and the church plays a role in supporting healthy, teens, children and teens. And I know that's a big part of your foundation. Why did you target, as part of your overall design of racial reconciliation, why have you targeted a large component for children and teenagers and youth development? And what do you see as that key to that aspect?
Yeah, we concluded when we formulated CCDA, and that was our best thought in terms of developing a national organization. The first thing we did, we began to look at what are the non-negotiables. What have we learned in these years of development that guarantees make development flourish or persevere, and it's developing of young people and the raising up of leaders, and we begin to call them raising up of indigenous leadership from the neighborhood and from the community. And that it is some form of education that people have to overcome most of our problems of life. It's some form of education. It might not be a whole lot of what we are giving them now. We might need to tweak that a little bit. Because it might have within it too much class, too much imperialism. You understand that, and don't teach enough of the oneness of humanity and the dignity of humanity. I think we still allow that. Not only is the bulliness, that's what you see, but the whole society is bully because everybody got to be better than somebody else. Or put them away. So we have then made to say, if you don't have within your structure, when you're talking about being a CCDA type development, there must be a children component that's a driving part of it. Whatever resources you might have, a proportion of those resources should go back to the children in the neighborhood and in the community. Right now, within the urban communities that we are coming from today, what we are doing is too little, too late, almost, not totally, because the statistics are still going against us. It was when we started development back in the 70s, you might say, early 60s, the children born out of wedlock in our community back in those days was somewhere around 45 or 50%. It's now 72%. Households intact back in those days was probably 60% in the positive. Now it's households without fathers and an intact family in the urban community is running somewhere under 80%, which means only 20% of those families are intact. So what we're doing is too little, and we're going backwards. It's just like recidivism in jail. That means the people who come out of jail and go back. That's now hanging around 65 or 70%. Which means we're losing. If it was in the 40s, we'd be winning. If it was past 50, we'd be winning. So our society is with all of the token programs that we have, is not adequate for the problem. Now we got churches, we could do statistics and say that we got enough churches. We got almost 400,000 churches in America. And if 2 or 3 of those churches was working with 2 or 3 children, 2 or 3 prisons, we could lick that baby. You see what I mean? So we don't have a good enough strategy. And so we are doing just a little stuff to show that we are doing a little stuff, but we are not. That's why we need some form of unity so we can begin to have some impact in our society. Otherwise, our nation is at a very crisis situation. We're at a crisis in our nation. Crisis. And the crisis is a crisis of hate. You can't get your folks together. And if they were my folks, I couldn't get them together. We are split on very small things that has very little to do with anything that has meaning. You know? So we're in, and so the church is as big a thing as we think in having very much impact in our society because the people are too lukewarm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Perkins, I understand that you were highly involved in the civil rights demonstrations in the 1960s. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on what place, if any, you think protesting and participation in public demonstrations have in the life of a Christian disciple or a community developer.
That's a good one. That's a good one. No, that's a good one. That's a good one. I think you got to have your objectives clear while you're doing this. And I think you have to have your objectives clear in terms of who you're going to participate with. If you hear, who you're going to participate with. And you got to look at the cause. What is the cause? I think in the civil rights movement, it was every black person was discriminated against based on his color. So you had a unity there. And I was black. I was one of them. So you know what I'm talking about? So you got to pick your battles. You got to pick your battles, and you got to know whether or not this battle represent. Like right now, I'm for the Wall Street kids. I don't know if I'm ready to go there now yet. No. I don't know if I'm ready to go. I think that I do believe that I'm about one of the few people that has been publicly trying to confront our wonderful, the best model of a system that ever been developed, our capitalistic system. But it can't hear. It has walled itself off from a prophetic voice. And so it can't hear the truth. And so it has bought off the truth with the great system we got. I think I'm one of the few people that say that in the public. And I'm the one person who organized that into my 3 hours. When I say redistribution, that confronts capitalism at its very core. You know, because the idea of capitalism, to make capital, to make more capital, the idea ought to be to do something good with it. But now we're putting it into the individuals and making a few individuals rich, but we're not spreading that capital in a way that it enriches the nation. And now, and one of the ways to equalize some of that is that all of us pay, and the one who make the most pay the most tax, because they get the greatest benefit from the natural resources. And so that ought to be taxed to give something back to the people, to provide public education and health care and disease control and those kind of things. Now we done polarize ourselves in the political parties, and we Christians are no longer getting our marching orders from the Bible, we're getting them from our political system. We are Christian and a Tea Party. We are Christian and Democrats. We are Christian and Republican. You get that? So we are getting our social action not from the Bible, but we're getting our social action from our political view. So it's a very complicated a situation, and Christians need to be discerning, in what battle they're going to fight. You know, I went to Washington a few years ago. She read it in my introduction to protest the cutting of the poverty program and giving money to the greedy instead of to the needy. I said, this is a good time for me to act. You know, and maybe my going there can show them a little better that they are doing that. So I'm in theory, I'm with the Wall Street people. I'm with the Wall Street people, because the Christian is not speaking to them, because the Christian have positioned themselves for money in a way that they need it, and they're afraid to offend anybody. And Christian have assumed that the people own it, the people that got it own it. That's not a biblical thought. That's not a biblical thought. The people who got it is stewards of it. The individual, the ownership belongs to God. And at some point they're going to leave it all. At some point they're going to give an account for having it, and was not good steward of the society. Nobody's telling the Christian that. Now, we got a few people who are not Christian who's doing it better than anybody. Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and a bunch of their friends are trying to figure out creative ways to give all their money away while they're alive. You get the idea? And so where are the Christians at in this kind of thing? So we are talking about the world and the system. The world and the system is not hearing a witness from the Christian, and we can't expect the world to witness to itself. And that's another biblical thought. Jesus says, go into all the world. You shall be my witnesses. Witnesses to what? Witness that there is a just God that died for justice, so that we could be just. That's the motivation of redemption. Is that people, he would create some people who would do justice and righteousness in the world. And they would reflect that and share that in the world. Not by force, not by military might, but by love. That's what the Christian church was supposed to do.
Question?
Yeah.
Dr. Perkins. My name is Angelique Crawford. I'm a senior here at Eastern University, and I am very, very glad to be here tonight. I think one of the questions and one of the things that concerns me the most is, as I look around, there are not that many students of color here. And what I'm concerned about or curious about is how do we, Professor Dirk Boyd mentioned it, there sometimes tends to be a residual anger amongst students of color. So how do we equip them to deal with racial reconciliation, deal with the residual anger, but still understand that that racial reconciliation is still necessary?
You go ahead.
Because one of the things that you said earlier was that you're glad that we do not have to deal with, our generation does not have to deal with the same issues that your generation and generations before us have had to deal with in terms of race. However, not dealing with those issues on some level has created a complacency. So how do we respond to that complacency? Because I'm not quite sure what to do.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't know either. Okay, all of. But here's one of the assumptions that I'm making. We have deified our blackness too, the way white folks have deified their whiteness, and we feel threatened by that. Okay, so we want a black church. We want a black church. We have sort of deified our culture. Our culture is better than them because we can sing better than white folk. We can twist better than white folk. And so we can do that better. And white folks will dilute that. And we won't be able to enjoy it as much. If they get there, they'll tramp our style. So we don't want too many of them there. You know. So that that's at the heart of some of this. And the only way to combat that is to come to the deep truth of it. Otherwise, it's going to be tack on. To call a church, to develop a church based on the race of those people is to minimize the Great Commission. You would see that in business. But how is it we can't see that? And so what we've done then is build around our culture, and that's one thing. Another thing is that in the black community, I'm going to us now. In the black community, we are challenging the white folks to do stuff that we don't do. Okay, and in our neighborhood, in our community. And the white folks are looking at that and they say, where's the black folk doing anything about that? They looking at us killing each other very bad. In my community, white folks ain't killing many of us now. They used to do that before the civil rights movement. The death in my community is black folks killing black folks, and it's almost genocide. That genocide is one race killing another race, and we are killing our own race in the community. These deaths white people look at that and say, why don't some black leadership rise up to do that? They do something about it. And if they rise up, I know, I'm conscious of the fact that I'm leading beyond my capability. I'm a third grader. I think the only reason white or black folks are following me is because I'm down there with them in the community. And our black folks are trying to get bigger Cadillacs, bigger Mercedes, bigger airplanes, bigger this, bigger this, bigger this. And we like that. And if I look down at that and I said, this is insane. I say it's insane. I say it's insane when the children are killing themselves on the street and that we are getting bigger that. And people look at that and say, what on earth? What on earth? Why should I risk anything in that? The Bible says, follow me. And then Jesus goes to the pain. When Jesus calls people, he calls them to follow him into the pain of this humanity. And so we're not doing it. And then we're asking white folks, and they say, these hypocritical people, I'm going to move out. And if I can't get far enough out, I'm going to come back and gate myself in. I'm going to gate myself in. And I ain't going to send my children to those schools because they're going to contaminate our schools. Ain't nobody talking about that. Ain't nobody talking about that. We saw the fuzzy fussing around, and our kids are killing each other every day in the community. And I don't like it. God don't like it. These precious young people in our community, and we're watching them die. And then we're talking about how big a car we got, how big a house we got, how big of this we got in our society. And with all the energy I got with the remaining of my life, that's what I want to do. I got enough money now to make it. You know? And so I can finally tell the truth and talk the truth about it. You know, and there need to be some people. And of course, money has to do with being content with what you have. That's what makes you rich. I'm quoting a scripture in 1 Timothy right now, chapter 6. Yeah, religion makes you rich. It makes you rich to be content with what you have. You didn't bring nothing to this world, and as certain as you're going to take nothing out of this world. You understand? So it's contentment we need in life. Okay, I'm preaching it, y'all. We need to close probably. We probably need to close.
We'll take, do you have a question here? And there's a question here. We'll take your 2 questions, and I'll have one final question, and we'll close out with that. So we're going to come here first.
Hey, Dr. Perkins. I have a question about discipleship. You talked at the start of our night about being lucky enough to have somebody step into your life at a young age and be able to help you kind of develop, which I think is interesting because I feel like now, I know even in my church, if you want to get discipled, you go to a class. You know, there's no sense of, and I feel really blessed. Just the other day, I put myself under mentors and counselors and all that stuff, and I'm blessed to have that as an option. I guess my question is, how do we get other people to buy into that, especially in the church? Because you're talking about a paradigm shift. It's the difference between you want to get discipled, go to a class, to you want to get discipled, go be under somebody, and once you're underneath them, you go disciple somebody else, and it's, how do we do that?
Yeah, I hear you. It might be more or less the content of what we teach them. You know, I think that the content, because I think there's a movement in small groups. So I think there's a movement there. I think if we could bring discipleship as an important element within this, and then of course people like you become examples. People like you go back to those groups, and then have the passion to be back with those groups. That's another thing. We have to be very careful. I was converted and discipled in sort of an evangelical fundamentalist environment. There came a time in my own growth and development and environment that I could make another choice. Anytime you succeed, you will come to new choices, better choices. And I decided then, where would I go? Would I go more to the liberal, bigger society, where the more social movement going? Where would I go? I decided to stay an evangelical. And I decided then I wanted to live my life out trying to improve the evangelical church, and not so over-condemn it, but to go back in it and be one of those and wrestle with that. Now, I'm saying that's what you have to do. You have to go back into this environment where you come from and wrestle with those people that already love you, and don't overshoot them and make them so angry, but get the patience to endure with them. And that's what I've done. That's what I've done. And there have been other people who've done that. Ron Sider here have done that. I was together when he started Evangelical Social Action. That was one of the little lights that come. Tony and all of those folks were with us when we started our Evangelical for Social Action in the society. And that has been one of the great things, that a lot of us have stayed together these 40 or so years. And we have found institutions like Eastern College. We inspired your MBA program. One of our guys developed the MBA program here, one of our businessmen, because Eastern had a more open engagement, and that you have encouraged. And that's why people like Tony and Ron and other professors, your theological professors, have been here to encourage that kind of environment into the world. And we're still trying to do that. We have an institute out at Seattle, the John Perkins Institute. We have an institute in Canada, the John Perkins Institute. And so we're going into some of those other, we're committed ourselves to the evangelical church movement in the side. And so I'm telling you, you're going to have to go back. That's what we got to do. We got to use our influence where we can use our influence, in a creative way.
Thank you. And last question from the floor.
I work in an elementary school, and most of the kids are African American. How do I, as a white teacher, build confidence in the kids and help them feel good about their race, being a white teacher? Because I feel like the only way I can really do that is by stepping back and having a black woman show them how to be confident about their race.
I don't really believe that. No, I don't really believe that. I don't really believe it. If I would have stepped back, I wouldn't have had all these white folks. More white folks are obeying me than other people. It's more of y'all. Now it's more of y'all. Y'all represent 70% of the American population. You understand? So that makes more sense. But but if I would have doubted I could do that, I sort of thought tonight where I was going, it was going to be 75 people. And I thought that 6 of those people would be white people. I could have then not come. I would have doubted myself. I don't believe that. I think it sounds all right. It has a little sense of humility in it. But it's doubting that you was created in the image of God. And it was doubt that God called you to teach those children. Now, I think the question is, back to the deal, how do you do it? I think that when we love, that's the best we can do. I don't think there's no better solution to building relationships than love. And I have found in our CCA movement that I have found little white women went into ghetto, Cathy Dudley went into a little ghetto in Dallas and developed a movement over there that's being led by indigenous people. She had a soccer ball and started playing with the children, and these was all African American children. So I don't really quite believe that. You understand? I believe I think you're in touch with your superiority. That's good. That's good. You're in touch with that. And so now you think you got to overhumble yourself. You know. And they used to do that when white folk used to come down to me. And they used to say, if I lead in your organization, I'm going to outshine the black folk. I said, I want all you got. I don't need no more ignorant in my community. My job here is to dispel ignorance. And let's pull people up, give them hope, give them a new start. You couldn't beat nobody in my community playing basketball. Don't you think we could do something else too? In my community, where I become my community, they taught our children how to play chess, and nobody could beat them. And those white folk would come down there and they'd be shocked that these black kids could beat them playing chess. Well, people can beat you doing anything they learn how to do. You know, I think that's part of, you know what I mean? Reconciliation, and I'm finished. Reconciliation assumes equality. It assumed that people was created in the image of God and everybody had worth and values. Now that worth and values has been twisted up in our fallen society. And that's why society got to be redeemed and we got to be redemptive people within it. And that's what the Christian's supposed to be. We're supposed to be the redemptive people. Thank y'all so much that y'all allowed me to highlight y'all tonight.